Hello to our wonderful audience here at Sci-fi Stories. We have some tough news, as YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us with zero budget to keep operating. If you find yourself captivated by today's story, please consider supporting us with just $1 so our dedicated team can cover their living expenses and continue bringing these adventures to life. You can support us by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the donation link in the video description or pinned comment. Thank you, and please enjoy the story. Terminus 9 smelled of burnt ozone, stale machine oil, and cold desperation. It was a subterranean black market buried deep within the crust of a dead moon, a place where scavengers and outlaws traded the rusted bones of forgotten starships. For Bryson Black, a veteran deep space salvage diver who was currently completely out of money, it was the last chance to stay afloat. The auction floor was a suffocating cavern of grinding gears and shouting cutthroats, a sea of armored mercenaries, bidding on scrapped cannons and irradiated hull plating. But Bryson was not looking for a weapon. He was looking for salvation. Under the harsh, flickering glare of the overhead sodium lights, the auctioneer gestured toward a massive, misshapen lump of metal sitting on a heavy loader. The object was entirely encased in a thick, ugly layer of hardened carbon slag. The auctioneer barked into the microphone, calling it an unidentified scrap reactor core pulled from the outer asteroid belts. The starting bid was painfully low. The crowd groaned in disinterest. To them, it was just dead weight, a hunk of junk that would cost more to transport than it would ever yield in raw materials. But Bryson felt a sudden, inexplicable pull. His diver instinct, honed over 2 decades of tearing apart dead ships in the cold void, screamed at him. He stepped closer, ignoring the heavy shoves of the pirates around him. There was no visible energy signature, no flashing lights, but beneath the noise of the cavern, Bryson could swear he felt a vibration in his boots. A low, rhythmic thrumming that felt less like a machine and more like a heartbeat. It was a gamble, the kind of foolish risk that had landed him in this miserable port to begin with. He raised his hand. He bid his entire remaining life savings, every last credit he owned. The cavern erupted into cruel laughter. A massive, heavily scarred bounty hunter, standing nearby, sneered, mocking the broke diver for buying the ugliest rock in the galaxy. Bryson ignored the taunts, keeping his eyes locked on the slag-covered mass. When the gavel slammed down, the lot belonged to him. He was officially broke, entirely desperate, and the proud owner of a mystery. Dragging the heavy prize back to his rented, dimly lit salvage bay took hours of grueling labor. The bay was a suffocating box of grease-stained walls and scattered tools. Bryson locked the heavy blast doors, isolating himself from the noise of the station. He grabbed his heavy-duty plasma torch, pulled down his welding mask, and ignited the flame. The brilliant blue fire roared to life. He pressed the searing heat against the thick carbon shell, intending to cut away the exterior and see what kind of core he had actually purchased. The moment the plasma kissed the slag, something incredible happened. The shell did not melt, it shattered. A web of hairline fractures raced across the hardened surface, glowing with an intense, internal blue light. Bryson stumbled backward, dropping his torch as the thick outer crust blew apart in a cloud of gray dust. Beneath the dirt and grime of the galaxy, the true form of his purchase was revealed. It was not a reactor core. It was a ship. But unlike any vessel Bryson had ever laid eyes on, there were no riveted steel plates, no exposed wiring, and no thruster nozzles. The hull was perfectly smooth, an organic curve of dark, iridescent metal that looked almost grown rather than built. Beneath the surface of the hull, thick veins of luminescent blue fluid pulsed with a steady, rhythmic life. It was breathtaking, a biomechanical marvel that made the surrounding industrial filth of Terminus 9 feel primitive and crude. Before Bryson could fully process the impossibility of the craft, The front section of the hull bloomed open, like the petals of a metallic flower. The heavy hissing of depressurization filled the small bay. Bryson drew his sidearm, cautiously stepping up to the open cockpit. He peered inside and froze. There was no pilot seat. There were no navigational screens, no flight yokes, and no throttle controls. The entire interior was dominated by a transparent, fluid-filled stasis pod. Floating within the glowing blue liquid was a woman. Bryson lowered his weapon, completely mesmerized. She was beautiful in a way that defied human comprehension. Her skin possessed the luminous, flawless quality of a white pearl, devoid of any blemishes. Her hair floated around her in the fluid, a cascading network of glowing fiber-optic threads that shimmered with microscopic pulses of light. She wore a skin-tight suit of sleek, dark material that seemed to meld seamlessly into her form. This was no salvage. This was a being of pure, ethereal grace, locked away in a mechanical tomb. Suddenly, the fluid within the pod began to drain away. The heavy glass shield hissed and slid back into the hull. The woman stirred. She opened her eyes, and Bryson gasped. Her irises were not human. They were swirling vortexes of brilliant, starlight energy, bright enough to cast shadows in the dim salvage bay. She did not look around in confusion. She looked directly at him, piercing, straight through his hardened exterior. Her lips never moved, but a voice echoed with perfect, crystal clarity directly inside Bryson's mind. Nervous system locked. Contract complete. Organism Bryson Black. You are now the captain. I am the heart of the ship, and our fates are now one. Bryson shook his head violently, attempting to dislodge the telepathic resonance echoing against the inside of his skull. He stared at the stunning alien entity, his calloused hands gripping his heavy plasma torch with white knuckles. I am not a pilot, Vile stated, her voice manifesting as a calm, melodic hum within the center of his consciousness. I am the central neural core of this vessel. Her designation is Ethelgard. By claiming ownership of the physical hull, your biology is now inextricably bound to my consciousness. You cannot sever this connection. Before Bryson could even open his mouth to demand a rational explanation about what a biological binding actually meant for a human being, the deafening, bone-rattling shriek of the station-wide alarm system tore through the cramped salvage bay. Blaring red strobe lights immediately bathed the grease-stained walls in a violent, pulsating glow. Heavy, magnetized boots slammed against the thick steel grating outside his reinforced bay doors. It was not the chaotic, uncoordinated stomping of the local station security detail. Bryson recognized the heavy, synchronized, and deadly march of Omnicorp mercenaries. The dark corporate syndicate was ruthless, and they must have tracked the latent radiation signature of the biomechanical vessel the exact moment the outer slag shell shattered. Proximity alert, Vile announced, with chilling, detached tranquility. Hostile combat forces are actively preparing to breach the outer reinforced doors. Estimated time to interior penetration is exactly 3 minutes. Bryson scrambled backward, tossing aside his heavy cutting torch and grabbing a massive industrial crowbar from his workbench. 3 minutes! Get this thing powered up right now. We need to fly out of this port before they turn us into space dust. Initiating biological awakening sequence, Vale replied smoothly, her glowing eyes blinking slowly. Please stand by. Optimal safety protocols dictate a slow, measured vascular expansion to prevent tissue damage. The vessel will be fully flight-ready in exactly 30 minutes. Bryson froze dead in his tracks, staring at the glowing woman in utter, terrifying disbelief. 30 minutes? Are you completely insane? We are going to be a collection of bloody bullet holes on the floor in less than 3. Accelerating the awakening process violently violates core safety parameters, Vile responded, her mental tone carrying a distinct hint of clinical, unwavering stubbornness. A sudden power surge could cause catastrophic neural degradation across the ship. We must adhere to the calculated timeline. We must wait. I am not waiting to die because a computer told me to, Bryson roared over the terrifying sound of a heavy, magnetic breaching charge being clamped onto the exterior of his blast door. He dropped the crowbar and dove straight toward the open cockpit. His wide eyes frantically scanned the smooth, organic interior of the vessel, desperately searching for anything that resembled a physical input terminal. There were no exposed wires, no fuse boxes, and no ignition switches. However, tucked beneath the base of Viel's transparent stasis pod, he spotted a thick cluster of glowing, exposed nerve endings. The bundle pulsed with a steady, rhythmic electrical charge. "Organism Bryson Black, step away from the primary neural junction immediately," Viel commanded, her melodic voice suddenly spiking with genuine alarm. Bryson ignored the warning. He reached down and violently ripped a heavy, insulated power cable straight from his deep space diving suit. It was a high-voltage emergency tether, a crude piece of equipment specifically designed to jumpstart dead salvage drones in the freezing vacuum of space. "What are you attempting to do? Your primitive technology is entirely incompatible with my advanced biological matrix. You will incinerate the primary cortex and kill us both." "Where I come from, we call it hot wiring," Bryson yelled back, gritting his teeth. He jammed the raw, sparking copper end of the high-voltage tether directly into the center of the bioluminescent nerve cluster. "Warning! Critical system violation!" Viel screamed inside his mind, the mental projection filled with absolute panic. Bryson slammed his heavy fist down onto the red discharge button of his suit's primary power pack. A massive, completely unregulated surge of raw electrical current blasted through the heavy cable. The entire hull of Ethelgard convulsed violently. The glowing blue veins running through the dark, organic metal instantly flashed to a blinding, furious shade of purple. The kinetic shockwave of the forced ignition threw Bryson backward, slamming him hard into the curved wall of the cockpit. The transparent pod snapped shut instantly, sealing Viel inside as the biomechanical engine screamed to life. It was a terrible, agonizing sound, exactly like a massive living beast being jolted awake with a lightning strike to the heart. Outside the ship, the heavy bay doors blew inward with a deafening, catastrophic explosion. A heavily armed squad of Omnicorp mercenaries, clad in thick black combat armor, poured through the billowing smoke, raising their heavy particle rifles to fire. They were exactly 1 second too late. The raw, unfiltered energy surging through the veins of Ethelgard bypassed every single safety check and warm-up routine built into her genetics. The ship violently tore itself free from the heavy docking clamps. With an earth-shattering boom, the vessel launched straight upward. The smooth, impenetrable organic nose of the ship smashed directly through the thick steel beams and solid concrete ceiling of the subterranean salvage bay. Massive chunks of debris rained down on the mercenaries below, as Ethelgard carved a chaotic, vertical tunnel of destruction straight through the rocky crust of Terminus 9. Bryson clung desperately to the smooth interior walls, his vision blurring heavily from the intense, crushing gravitational forces of the uncalculated launch. They broke through the barren surface of the dead moon, exploding out into the cold, silent, and endless void of deep space. A relentless barrage of green laser fire from the orbiting Omnicorp blockade ships immediately chased after them, painting the blackness with lethal streaks of concentrated light. But Ethelgard moved with a terrifying, unpredictable speed, heavily fueled by the reckless jolt of human electricity. The ship banked hard to the left, weaving fluidly through the incoming heavy fire and rocketing past the outer asteroid belt, leaving the corporate fleet far behind in the dust. Inside the dim cockpit, the violent shaking finally ceased. The furious purple light slowly faded back into a calm, steady blue pulse. Bryson gasped loudly for air, coughing as he pulled himself up from the smooth floor. Inside the sealed pod, Vale floated in absolute, stunned silence. Her vast, highly advanced intellect was actively struggling to process the impossible data flowing into her sensors. Her absolute logic dictated that the crude electrical surge should have permanently destroyed her neural net and killed them both instantly. Yet, the ship was flying with perfect efficiency, and they were completely alive. Your actions were completely irrational and devoid of logic, Vile whispered softly in his mind, her tone completely stripped of its previous clinical certainty. The mathematical probability of survival was strictly negligible. Bryson grinned through the pain, lifting his hand to wipe a warm streak of blood away from his bruised forehead. Welcome to the human way of doing things, sweetheart. For the very first time in her long, calculated existence, the perfect biological machine understood a deeply terrifying truth. Absolute mathematical calculation had almost doomed them to death. It was the wild, unpredictable, and impulsive recklessness of humanity that held the true key to survival in this chaotic universe. Ethelgard glided silently into the churning, violent heart of the Vale of Tarsus, a massive magnetic nebula composed of highly ionized gas and dense, heavy radiation. The swirling clouds of emerald and violet dust effectively scrambled all tracking sensors and radar arrays, providing a perfect, impenetrable blind spot against the pursuing corporate fleet. The chaotic, swirling energy outside painted the smooth, organic walls of the cockpit with shifting, ghostly colors. Bryson collapsed heavily against the curved bulkhead, sliding down the wall until he hit the floor. His chest heaved violently as the massive spike of adrenaline slowly drained from his nervous system. For several long minutes, the only sound within the darkened cabin was the deep, rhythmic breathing of the ship itself, a slow, thumping sound that felt entirely too human for comfort. Bryson finally pushed himself up from the floor, his muscles aching from the violent escape. He walked slowly over to the transparent pod holding Val. The glowing blue fluid had completely receded, leaving her suspended gracefully in a faint anti-gravity field. "All right," Bryson said, his voice rough, raspy, and completely exhausted. "We lost them, for now. But Omnicorp does not just give up. They will keep hunting us across every sector until they get what they want. I need to know exactly what kind of hardware I am flying here. Bring up the tactical displays. Show me the weapon systems, particle cannons, heavy torpedo bays, laser batteries, whatever you have hidden in this hull. We are going to need serious, overwhelming firepower if we want to survive the next encounter." Vile floated gracefully down to the solid floor of the pod. The heavy glass barrier simply dissolved into a fine, sparkling mist, allowing her to step out freely into the main cockpit area. She moved without a single sound, her glowing hair trailing behind her like the tail of a miniature comet. "There are no tactical displays, Captain." Her voice echoed softly in his mind, carrying a profound, quiet sadness that seemed to chill the air. "There are no particle cannons. There are no heavy torpedo bays. Ethelgard was not constructed for destruction, nor was she built to wage war." Bryson stared at her, aggressively rubbing his temples as a massive headache began to form. "Do not tell me I just spent my entire life savings on an unarmed luxury transport. Those mercenaries back there blew through solid steel blast doors like they were paper. They will tear us apart the second we leave this nebula. If this is not a warship, what exactly is this vessel?" Vielle raised her delicate, pearl-white hand, and the walls of the cockpit physically shifted. The smooth, metallic surface became entirely translucent, revealing the absolute, protected center of the ship beneath the floorboards. Bryson gasped, taking a sudden step back. Suspended within a massive chamber of swirling, liquid golden light was a crystalline sphere, roughly the size of a human heart. It pulsed with a fragile, incredibly beautiful energy, casting a warm, radiant glow that felt deeply comforting to the very core of his soul. Ethelgard is not a transport, nor is she a freighter, Vial explained softly, stepping closer to the translucent floor. She is a cosmic chrysalis, and I am her sole designated guardian. Bryson took a slow step forward, completely captivated by the mesmerizing golden sphere. He could see microscopic galaxies swirling within its crystalline depths. "What is that?" he asked, his voice involuntarily dropping to a reverent whisper. "It is the final, ultimate legacy of my people," Vial replied, the sorrow in her telepathic projection deepening into an endless ocean of grief. "My creators, the Lumina, walked among the stars tens of thousands of years ago. They were brilliant architects of biology, peaceful gardeners of the cosmos who dedicated their existence to cultivating life. But even the greatest, most enlightened civilizations eventually face the inevitable shadow of the Great Silence. When the cosmic cataclysm came, tearing our empire apart, they knew their time had officially ended. Before the infinite darkness consumed our beautiful homeworld, they poured the very essence of their entire civilization, their complete genetic memory, their vast culture, and their boundless love for the universe, into this single, heavily armored vessel." Vial looked down at the glowing sphere, her brilliant starlight eyes dimming slightly with ancient sorrow. "That is the Genesis seed. It possesses the complex biological framework required to terraform a completely dead, barren planet into a thriving, breathing world of vast oceans and towering green forests. It is the literal breath of life itself, preserved perfectly in the dark." The immense, crushing weight of her words settled heavily onto Bryson's tired shoulders. He had spent his entire life picking through the cold, dead bones of destroyed ships, tearing apart the tragic past just to buy a cheap meal and a warm bed. Now, he was standing in the very presence of a universal miracle. "It is incredibly beautiful," Bryson muttered, entirely unable to look away. But as he watched closely, the vibrant golden light within the sphere flickered violently, dimming for a brief, terrifying second before pulsing again, noticeably weaker than before. "It is dying," Vial stated, confirming his unspoken fear. "The Genesis seed was designed to hibernate safely, but we have drifted endlessly in the cold, dark void for far too long. The biological battery maintaining the stasis field is rapidly failing. If the seed perishes, the core will collapse entirely. Ethelgard will instantly disintegrate into useless ash, and I will cease to exist alongside the final hope of my beloved creators." Bryson turned to face her, the reality of the situation hitting him like a physical blow. "How do we fix it? Tell me exactly how we save it." Vial projected a massive, three-dimensional star map into the empty air between them. A single, brilliantly white point of light glowed brightly amidst the holographic sea of stars. "The seed requires a massive, overwhelming infusion of pure, unfiltered stellar energy to revitalize its failing matrix. We must immerse the chrysalis directly into the blazing corona of a specific white dwarf star, located exactly 3 light-years from our current hiding position. The unique radiation signature of that specific star perfectly matches the exact frequency needed to trigger the awakening process." Bryson looked at the glowing map, then back down at the flickering golden heart beneath his boots. He had originally purchased this ugly lump of slag, hoping to strip it down, sell the rare metals on the black market, and maybe buy a small, quiet freighter to live out his remaining days in peace. He had desperately wanted a simple life, entirely free from crippling debt and constant danger. But selling Ethelgard now would mean handing over a literal Genesis engine to a ruthless, bloodthirsty corporate syndicate. Omnicorp would undoubtedly twist this beautiful miracle into a horrifying biological weapon of unimaginable destruction. Or worse, he could run away and simply let it die entirely, extinguishing a beautiful civilization forever. He looked deeply at Vale. She was technically a machine, perhaps, but the profound sorrow, the heavy burden of duty, and the desperate hope radiating from her mind were more intensely human than anything he had felt from actual people in decades. Bryson let out a long, heavy sigh, a resigning sound that echoed through the quiet cabin. He reached out, stopping just short of touching the glowing holographic star projection. "I have spent the last 40 years of my life tearing broken things apart," Bryson said, his voice steadily rising, finding a new, completely unexpected resolve burning in his chest. "I think it is about time I actually helped build something." He turned to face the beautiful alien guardian directly, his expression hardened with absolute determination. "We are not selling this ship. We are not running away to hide in the dark. Plot the exact course to that white dwarf star. You have my word, Vile. I am going to help you finish your mission." The Vale of Tarsus offered temporary sanctuary, but it was essentially a dead end. To reach the white dwarf star, located 3 light-years away, Ethelgard required a slip-space drive. It was a piece of advanced technology completely absent from her organic, sublight anatomy. Bryson pulled up a local sector map, his eyes settling on a heavily fortified asteroid base nearby. It belonged to Kalen, a notoriously brutal pirate warlord who hoarded stolen military tech. He definitely had a slip-space drive. The only problem was taking it from him. Vile spent exactly 45 minutes calculating an infiltration strategy. She projected a complex, highly detailed holographic schematic of the asteroid fortress. The optimal approach, Vile explained with absolute, clinical confidence, involves disabling their primary sensory grid during their rotational blind spot. We will then execute a micro-thruster burn, landing completely undetected on the northern exhaust port. You will crawl through the ventilation shafts for exactly 2 hours and 14 minutes, retrieve the drive, and exit precisely when the internal guard shift changes, factoring in human biological limitations. The probability of success is 99.8%, provided you do not deviate by a single millisecond. Bryson stared at the glowing blue hologram, then let out a long, heavy sigh. "Vale, that is a fantastic plan if I were a cybernetic ninja. But I am a 40-year-old salvage diver with bad knees and a tendency to sneeze when I get nervous. If I try to crawl through a dusty vent for 2 hours, we are both going to die. We are doing this the Earth way." Vile blinked her starlight eyes in genuine confusion. "What exactly is the Earth way?" "We knock on the front door, lie straight to their faces, grab the goods, and blow our way out." Before Vale could formulate a mathematical argument against such sheer lunacy, Bryson had already engaged the sublight engines, steering Ethelgard straight out of the nebula and directly into the pirate lord's crosshairs. Within 20 minutes, Ethelgard was clamped tightly inside the massive, rust-colored hangar of the pirate fortress. Bryson stood confidently at the base of the ship's boarding ramp, surrounded by 24 heavily armed thugs. Warlord Kalen, a massive, cybernetically enhanced brute with a metal jaw, stomped forward. He eyed the beautiful organic ship with pure, unadulterated greed. "I found it floating in the outer rim," Bryson lied smoothly, flashing a crooked, charming grin. "It is a rare biomechanical prototype, fully functional, but I am a simple man with expensive debts. I want 100,000 credits in untraceable chips and a military-grade slip-space drive, or I am walking away." Inside Bryson's mind, Vile was practically vibrating with righteous fury. "You are surrendering me to a common thief. I entrusted you with the Genesis seed, the final hope of the Lumina, and you trade it for mere currency? Your betrayal is a statistically improbable anomaly of human treachery. Hold your horses, sweetheart." Bryson muttered under his breath, barely moving his lips. Kalen laughed. A harsh, grating sound that echoed off the hangar walls. He snapped his thick fingers. Two mechanics rolled forward a heavy containment cart. Resting on top of it was exactly what they needed. A pristine, military-grade slipspace drive, humming with contained quantum energy. "You get the drive and 50,000 credits. Salvage trash," Kalen growled, stepping closer to Bryson. "Or I kill you right here and take the ship for free." "Fair enough," Bryson said, keeping his hands completely visible. He slowly leaned back against the smooth, organic hull of Ethelgard, hidden from Kalen's view. Bryson extended his index finger. He began to tap rapidly against the alien metal, short and long rhythmic strikes. Tap, 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 tap. Inside the cockpit, Vial's vast intellect registered the kinetic impacts. It was an ancient, primitive human communication system, Morse code. She deciphered the acoustic pattern instantly. "You magnificent, deceitful creature," Vial whispered in his mind, her righteous anger vanishing into a sudden spark of exhilarating realization. Ethelgard did not possess standard cargo lifters, but she did have highly advanced localized gravity manipulators meant for capturing space debris. Vial instantly bypassed her own strict internal safety overrides. A massive, invisible wave of focused magnetic force erupted from the ship's lower hull. The heavy containment cart violently ripped itself out of the mechanic's hands. It flew through the air, completely defying gravity, and slammed directly into Ethelgard's open cargo bay. The doors snapped shut instantly, locking the slipspace drive safely inside. Kalen stared at his empty cart for exactly 1 second before his face twisted into pure rage. "Kill him!" he roared. But Bryson was already moving. He ducked under a wild swing from the warlord, delivering a crushing, brutal right hook straight to Kalen's human eye. As the giant stumbled backward, Bryson drew his vintage kinetic pistol from his hip holster. He did not aim for the pirates. He aimed straight up, firing 3 heavy tungsten rounds into the massive overhead coolant pipes. Freezing, blinding white vapor exploded into the hangar, plunging the entire area into absolute chaos. Laser fire erupted wildly in every direction, but the pirates were shooting blindly into the thick fog. Bryson sprinted up the boarding ramp, firing over his shoulder to keep the thugs suppressed. He dove into the cockpit just as the ramp sealed shut. "Connect the drive and get us out of here," Bryson yelled, slapping a fresh magazine into his smoking pistol. "The slipspace drive requires physical integration, which will take exactly 40 seconds, Vial reported, her mental voice, now completely devoid of panic, replaced instead by a chilling, calculated excitement. "I will provide covering fire. You do not have any weapons. I am improvising." Outside the ship, the pirates began charging the hull with heavy breaching lasers. Suddenly, the external plasma exhaust vents on Ethelgard's sides shifted their angles. Vial aggressively purged the ship's highly pressurized sublight cooling systems, blasting a blinding, searing wave of superheated plasma directly across the hangar floor. It was not a laser cannon, but the massive wall of blue fire sent the heavily armed pirates scrambling backward in sheer terror, dropping their weapons to avoid being instantly incinerated. "Slipspace drive successfully assimilated," Vial announced. The entire ship vibrated intensely as the newly stolen quantum engine synced with the biological matrix. "Punch it," Bryson ordered, strapping himself into the makeshift acceleration harness. The organic ship glowed with intense, blinding light. The hangar walls blurred. The physical space around them stretched, and with a silent, localized sonic boom, Ethelgard violently tore a hole in the fabric of reality, vanishing from the pirate fortress entirely. They reappeared in the quiet, empty expanse of deep space, bathed in the soft glow of distant stars. Bryson let out a massive, booming laugh, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He looked over at the ethereal alien guardian. Vial hovered gracefully near the navigation console, her glowing fiber-optic hair shimmering brightly. She looked at Bryson, her starlight eyes wide, with an emotion that looked suspiciously like profound respect. "My calculations were fundamentally flawed," Vale admitted softly, her telepathic voice echoing with absolute awe. "I analyzed every possible tactical variable, but I completely failed to account for audacity. You weaponized deception, utilized a blatant lie as a tactical shield, and manipulated their greed to bypass a heavily fortified perimeter. The ability of the human mind to calculate risk, manufacture chaos, and completely disregard logical survival parameters is a terrifying, unparalleled weapon. The universe has absolutely no defense against you." Bryson smiled, holstering his vintage pistol. "That veil is why you always bring a human to a robbery." The turbulent tear in reality smoothed out as Ethelgard dropped out of slipspace. The cockpit was immediately bathed in the harsh, blinding and sterile light of the white dwarf star. It hung in the absolute emptiness of space like a burning, furious diamond. The intense radiation would have incinerated a lesser vessel, but the organic hull absorbed the sheer heat, translating the raw energy into a soothing, rhythmic pulse. Vale floated toward the center of the room, positioning herself directly above the translucent floor where the fading Genesis seed rested. "The stellar frequency is a perfect match," Vale announced, her voice trembling slightly, with an emotion she had suppressed for millennia. "I must begin the assimilation process. To channel this immense solar power into the dying core, I must dissolve my independent neural boundaries and merge my consciousness entirely with the ship's deeper subroutines. During this exact phase, my higher cognitive functions will go offline. I will be completely deaf, blind, and entirely unable to defend the vessel." Bryson nodded firmly, gripping his vintage pistol. "Do it, I will keep watch." Vile closed her glowing starlight eyes. Her pearlescent skin began to shift, dissolving slightly at the edges as brilliant streams of light poured from her body, sinking directly into the translucent floorboards. The golden sphere below flared with a sudden, desperate hope. Then, the proximity alarm shrieked. It was not a single, blaring tone. It was a chaotic symphony of pure, terrifying panic. The fabric of space surrounding the white dwarf violently ruptured in a dozen different locations. Massive, jagged black silhouettes emerged from the tiers. It was an entire armada. Heavy cruisers, heavily armored frigates, and a massive, hulking dreadnought bearing the blood-red insignia of Omnicorp. They had completely boxed Ethelgard in, forming an inescapable sphere of heavy weaponry. Bryson slammed his fist against the useless control console. "Vale, pull out! We walked right into a trap!" But Vale could not hear him. Her consciousness was already sinking deep into the glowing roots of the Genesis seed. The main communication console violently flared to life. The audio feed cracked open without Bryson's permission. A cold, aristocratically cruel voice filled the small cockpit. It was CEO Malachor, the ruthless head of the syndicate. "My deepest thanks, Mr. Black," Malachor sneered through the speakers. "We never lost your trail in that nebula. We merely stepped back and let you do the impossible. My scientists deduced the seed required a specific celestial catalyst to awaken, but the exact star was completely lost to history. We needed the Guardian to guide us right to the nursery. Now, we have the ultimate terraforming weapon. Imagine the power to rewrite entire atmospheres, choking worlds with toxic jungles or starving them with barren deserts, all at a single command." Bryson grabbed the comms array. "You are not touching this ship! Malachor! The Guardian will rip your fleet apart the second she wakes up!" Malachor laughed, a dry, metallic sound. "Oh, we are entirely prepared for the Guardian. Did you truly believe my corporation stumbled upon this vessel by accident? We spent 3 billion credits excavating the dead worlds of the Lumina. We found more than just myths in those dust and ashes. We found the master key." A sudden, highly synthesized audio file blasted through the ship's internal speakers. It was not a language. It was an agonizing, multi-layered frequency of grinding, dissonant tones, an ancient override code. The reaction was immediate and absolutely catastrophic. Vile's physical form violently snapped back from the floor. She screamed, a horrifying psychic shriek of pure, unadulterated agony that physically knocked Bryson to his knees. The glowing blue veins running through the organic walls instantly turned a sickly, necrotic gray. The majestic hum of the ship died, replaced by the terrible, strained groaning of failing internal pressure. Override confirmed. The ship's automated, deeply buried subroutines droned in a dead, robotic monotone, completely stripping away Vile's melodic voice. Neural core locked. Administrative privileges revoked. Outside, massive, armor-piercing grappling hooks fired from the surrounding frigates. The heavy tungsten claws violently smashed into Ethelgard's beautiful hull, tearing deep into the organic metal. Thick steel cables pulled taut, violently jerking the helpless vessel toward the open, glowing maw of the dreadnought's heavy cargo bay. Bryson scrambled to his feet, blood dripping from his nose. He frantically slammed his hands across the biomechanical dashboard, trying to reroute power, trying to do absolutely anything. Dead. The entire ship was completely dead. The control panels were cold and lifeless. His weapons were locked. His navigation was offline. In the center of the room, Vile fell hard to the floor. The glowing fiber-optic threads of her hair were dimming rapidly, turning ashen and brittle. Her skin was freezing over, covered in a creeping layer of digitized frost as the corporate malware forcefully suppressed her vast intellect, burying her alive inside her own mind. Bryson crawled over to her, sliding on the tilted floor as the dreadnought dragged them closer. He pulled her cold, heavy upper body into his arms. "Vile, fight it! You have to fight it!" Her starlight eyes flickered wildly, struggling against the encroaching darkness. A tiny, incredibly weak thread of thought managed to pierce through the thick ice of the mental lockdown, echoing faintly in Bryson's mind. "Captain," she whispered, her telepathic voice shattered and fading. "They must not take the Genesis seed. They will twist the breath of life into a plague of death. My creators would weep. I cannot hold the lockdown. You must go to the lower engineering deck. Find the central vascular artery. Sever it completely. Overload the slipspace drive." Bryson stared at her, sheer horror gripping his heart. "That will detonate the entire core. It will blow the ship, the seed, and us into dust." A single, glowing tear fell from Vile's freezing eye. "I know. Please, Bryson. I beg of you. Let us die as a beacon of hope, not live as an instrument of slaughter. Burn it all down." Her eyes rolled back, the starlight completely extinguished. Vile's body went totally rigid, frozen solid in the agonizing grip of the override code. The ship groaned heavily as the corporate dreadnought began to reel them into its dark, waiting jaws. Bryson was completely alone, trapped in a dead ship, holding the frozen corpse of a goddess, and facing the impossible choice of total annihilation. Bryson gently laid Vale's frozen, rigid body onto the cold floor of the dead cockpit. He looked at the rapidly dimming Genesis seed beneath the translucent panels. Then out the viewport at the massive Omnicorp dreadnought, slowly reeling them in like a caught fish. The absolute certainty of defeat hung heavily in the air, a mathematical conclusion calculated by the greatest corporate supercomputers in the galaxy. But those machines did not understand the stubborn, irrational core of humanity. "No," Bryson growled, his voice echoing in the silent cabin. "Humans never destroy their own property before trying to fix it with a heavy hammer first." He sprinted toward the rear airlock, tearing open his heavy salvage locker. He dragged out his reinforced deep space diving suit. The bulky, heavily scarred armor designed to withstand the crushing pressures and extreme radiation of hazardous wrecks. He locked the heavy helmet into place, grabbed his industrial plasma torch, and slung a massive pair of hydraulic bolt cutters over his shoulder. Bryson manually pumped the airlock release. The heavy outer door blasted open, venting the remaining cabin atmosphere into the void. He stepped out onto the exterior hull of Ethelgard. The sheer scale of the ambush was terrifying. Omnicorp frigates surrounded them in a tight sphere, their heavy weapon batteries tracking the crippled organic ship. The massive tow cables from the dreadnought hummed with terrifying tension, dragging them closer to the dark hangar bay. Bryson engaged his magnetic boots, locking himself to the smooth, iridescent metal of the hull. He fought against the intense gravitational pull of the white dwarf star and the violent jerking of the tow cables. He crawled upward, his eyes scanning the organic architecture for the source of the lockdown. There, near the dorsal ridge, a cluster of biological sensory nodes was violently glowing with a sick, digitized gray light. They were acting as the forced receiver antennas for the corporate override signal. A heavily armed Omnicorp fighter drone swooped down, firing a rapid burst of kinetic rounds that shattered the hull plating just inches from Bryson's heavy boots. He ignored the incoming fire, dragging himself to the infected sensory nodes. The corporate supercomputers aboard the dreadnought were busy running trillions of complex tactical algorithms, anticipating electronic countermeasures, firewall breaches, and software reboots. But they absolutely could not predict a desperate mechanic wielding crude, physical tools. Bryson ignited his plasma torch. The searing blue flame sliced straight through the thick, armored membrane protecting the nodes. He dropped the torch, grabbed his heavy hydraulic cutters, and clamped the massive steel jaws directly onto the glowing gray nerve cluster. With a furious roar, he squeezed the heavy handles. The thick biological cables snapped with a wet, violent crunch. Instantly, the digitized gray frost vanished from the hull. The ship violently shuddered as the beautiful, luminescent blue energy flooded back into its veins. Inside Bryson's helmet, a sudden, glorious wave of telepathic warmth washed over his mind. "Captain," Vale's voice echoed, breathless and filled with profound shock. "The neural blockade is severed. I have reclaimed the primary cortex." "Burn the tow cables!" Bryson yelled, scrambling back toward the airlock as the ship roared to life beneath his boots. Ethelgard's defensive localized gravity emitters flared, violently snapping the heavy tungsten cables. The organic vessel lurched free. Bryson tumbled through the open airlock, slamming the heavy door shut and sealing the breach just as the ship rapidly repressurized. He ripped off his helmet, running back to the cockpit. Vile was hovering above the floor, her starlight eyes burning with furious, unbound energy. But the victory was entirely short-lived. The massive dreadnought above them began to glow with blinding, crimson light. "They are charging their primary heavy laser batteries," Vile warned, her voice trembling. "Our organic shielding is fractured. A direct hit will instantly vaporize the entire hull." "We are not going to sit here and take it," Bryson said, staring out at the blazing white dwarf star dominating the viewport. "Vile, reroute all remaining power from the shields and weapons directly to the sublight engines. We are not going to absorb the energy slowly from orbit. We are going to dive straight into the atmosphere of that star. We are going to force hatch the seed right now." Vile stared at him, her vast intellect instantly running the terrifying calculations. "Diving into the stellar corona will subject the hull to catastrophic thermal limits. The sheer pressure will crush us. My logic parameters indicate a 99% probability of absolute mutual destruction." Bryson strapped himself tightly into the pilot harness, gripping the manual override controls. He looked directly into her glowing eyes. "Then, I choose to bet everything on our 1% chance. Trust me." For a fraction of a second, the perfect biological guardian hesitated. Then, she smiled. It was a fiercely beautiful, deeply human expression. "I trust you, Captain." Vile did not just connect to the ship. She dissolved her glowing, ethereal form completely, transforming into a torrent of pure, blinding data and light. She surged forward, plunging directly into Bryson's chest. The physical and mental impact was astronomical. Bryson gasped as his human mind forcefully expanded, instantly merging with the vast, ancient intelligence of the alien guardian. He could suddenly feel every single nerve of the ship, every flowing vein of energy, every microscopic fracture in the hull. They were no longer a pilot and a computer. They were one single, perfect organism. "Hold on!" their combined voice roared through the cabin. Ethelgard flipped backward, her engines violently flaring. The ship shot forward like a fired bullet, diving straight down into the furious, burning ocean of the white dwarf star. The Omnicorp dreadnought fired its massive crimson laser, but the beam harmlessly grazed their rear thrusters as they broke through the outer stellar atmosphere. The heat was utterly unimaginable. The organic metal of the cockpit walls began to blister and melt. The warning alarms melted into a continuous, deafening scream. The crushing gravity of the dense star pressed against Bryson's chest like a mountain, breaking his ribs. Down below the translucent floorboards, the golden Genesis seed was violently thrashing. The immense, impossible pressure of the dying star was acting as a cosmic hammer, striking the fragile crystalline shell. "Now!" Bryson and Vale screamed together in his mind. The crystalline sphere shattered. Time seemed to stop entirely. From the dying heart of the seed, an unparalleled, blinding shockwave of pure biological genesis, energy erupted outward. It was a silent, magnificent explosion of emerald and gold light that instantly ripped completely through the white dwarf star, blasting outward into the cold vacuum of space. The colossal wave of life crashed over the heavily armed Omnicorp fleet. The destructive technology of the corporate syndicate stood absolutely no chance against the raw, unfiltered power of creation. The heavy laser cannons on the dreadnought instantly morphed into thick, blooming vines of vibrant alien flora. The cold, steel armor plating of the frigates aggressively mutated, expanding into colossal, living forests of metallic trees that breathed oxygen directly into the empty void. Their engines died, replaced by the peaceful, rhythmic heartbeat of massive, newly born ecosystems. The entire armada was instantaneously neutralized, transformed from machines of death into drifting, magnificent gardens of life. Inside the blazing corona of the star, the shattered core of Ethelgard began to rapidly expand. The organic hull dissolved completely, serving as the biological placenta for the birth of a literal god, a colossal spacefaring leviathan woven from pure starlight, nebula gas, and living energy unfurled its massive, ethereal wings. The newly born cosmic entity let out a joyous, silent roar that reverberated across the entire galaxy. With a single, elegant sweep of its wings, the magnificent creature physically tore a massive rupture in the fabric of space, creating a glowing, safe slipspace portal leading far away from the dying star. But Ethelgard was completely gone. The cockpit was disintegrating around Bryson into burning ash. He felt a sudden, violent severing in his mind. Vale was forcefully disconnected from his neural network, without the ship to house her vast consciousness. The biological safety protocols had aggressively compressed her existence down into a single, fragile, and entirely independent mortal body. She fell hard against the melting floorboards, gasping for actual breath, her glowing starlight eyes replaced by warm, deeply human irises. Bryson unbuckled his harness, ignoring the agonizing pain in his chest. He grabbed the heavy collar of her sleek suit, hauling her desperately toward the only surviving piece of the ship, the reinforced emergency salvage pod. He threw her heavily inside, diving in right behind her and violently slamming his fist onto the manual launch sequence button. The small, heavily battered escape pod blasted out of the disintegrating cockpit just as the last remnants of Ethelgard turned to dust. They shot straight upward, riding the slipstream of the newborn cosmic Leviathan, and plunged directly through the glowing blue portal just before it snapped shut entirely. The violent turbulence faded into absolute, profound silence. Bryson slowly opened his eyes. The interior of the small escape pod was entirely dark, save for the soft glow of the emergency lights. Outside the tiny reinforced window, unfamiliar constellations dotted the sky of a quiet, unnamed galaxy, located millions of light-years away from Terminus 9, Omnicorp, and their chaotic past. He turned his head slowly. Vile was sitting against the opposite wall, holding her knees to her chest. She looked down at her hands, flexing her newly mortal fingers, feeling the strange, wonderful sensation of a beating, fragile heart inside her chest. She looked up at Bryson. She was no longer a perfect machine, and she was no longer a goddess. She was simply alive. Bryson let out a weak, exhausted chuckle, leaning his tired head back against the metal wall. He did not have his salvage ship. He did not have his life savings. He was completely, undeniably broke. But as he looked at the incredibly beautiful woman sitting across from him, breathing the same recycled air, he realized he had never felt more wealthy in his entire life. Vile smiled, a bright, genuine, and stunningly warm expression. They had lost absolutely everything, but they were completely free. The universe was vast, and they were finally ready to start a brand new chapter, building their lives together from the very beginning. Thank you so much to our amazing listeners for joining us on this incredible journey today. We would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please let us know your city or country in the comments below. As we mentioned earlier, YouTube has completely removed our ability to earn revenue, leaving our dedicated team without the means to support their families. If you felt moved or entertained by today's adventure, please consider helping us with a donation of just $1. You can easily do this by scanning the QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the donation link we have provided in the video description and pinned comment. Your incredible generosity is the only thing keeping this channel alive and allowing us to create more fantastic stories for you. Thank you, and we will see you among the stars.